Hi. This is obviously a very odd way of doing a conference. I just want to check that everyone can, well, on the chat, if you can hear me okay, and if you can see the screen that I've got up as well with the presentation. But it looks like it's all working okay. So I was going to get cracking. Cool. A couple of people said everything's perfect. So thank you all very much for coming today. I'm Martin Bradley from 2CV, a market research company, and I'm a research director in our tech and entertainment team. The presentation I've got for you today is called Esports, the Golden Harbour. Some big phrase that. Is esports the next big thing for the gaming industry? And we're going to focus on the UK today. That's the industry that we know the best ourselves at 2CV, and it's where we've actually done some of our research on. So I'm just going to take you through the presentation that we've got for you. Let's get it on my screen and let's crack away. So I'm just going to throw a few numbers at you to the start just to kind of set the scene. So we can just look at, is esports a big thing? Because it's a big word that people are talking about at the moment. And one of the things we need to attach to it is, how big is it? Well, the answer is yes, it's a big thing. In 2019, the global revenue from esports was 1.1 billion, and that's projected to grow to 1.8 billion in 2022. Now that might change at the moment due to current events and actually go up. But at the moment, that's some pretty significant growth that esports as a market is seeing. The other thing to kind of look at is how many people are watching it. You know, how big is it in terms of eyes on the screen? And again, the answer is yes, it's big. So we've got 454 million people watching esports globally last year. And that's predicted in the next couple of years to go up by nearly 50% to 644 million. Again, that's some pretty big growth in terms of eyes watching esports. And at the moment, again, we can't escape the current situation, but Steam, a lot of you be aware of the company Steam, who are one of the big gaming broadcasting software. They've actually seen a couple of records in the last couple of weeks. So the highest concurrent users at over 23 million, and the highest concurrent players are over 7 million. So records are being smashed all around for esports at the moment. It's a big thing. I've also just had a quick look at how much money's on offer. You know, is it big from a money side? And again, the answer is yes. I mean, Dota 2, the international, is the biggest esports tournament. And the prize fund overall was over 34 million for the 2019 series. The winning team got over 15 million. I mean, these are huge numbers. In advance of today, and with this format, I'm not going to do my interactive quiz. It's a bit difficult. There's no one in the room. But if you look at the PGA Masters in golf, that prize fund is 11.5 million. So just a third of the size of Dota 2. And the whole prize fund for Wimbledon for this year, well, what would have been for this year for men's and women's, was 38 million. So Dota 2 is just behind the whole prize fund for Wimbledon. So that's our first kind of box ticked. Esports, it is a big thing. The numbers prove it's a big thing. But is it a big thing in gambling? Well, global gambling revenue is predicted to increase between 2019 and 2020. Just under 500 billion in 2019, predicted to be 565 billion in 2020. Again, current events may change that, but gambling as an industry is growing just as esports is. Esports is obviously growing at a pretty bigger trajectory than gambling. How much money does esports take up within gambling? Well, they're big numbers. Last year, 7 billion was wagered across the world on esports. And in 2020, that's tipped to be 14 billion, to double in a year. But if we take a step back and just have a look at, what percent is that of the total gambling revenue? In 2019, it's just 1%. And in 2020, that's only going to be 2%. So the potential for esports gambling revenue to take up more of that share is absolutely huge. If you look at how many people are watching it, how many people engage with it, there is definitely a disconnection between the amount of people who are betting on it compared to other sports that we know more about. I said at the beginning, I'm going to focus on the UK mainly, and for the rest of this presentation, I'll focus on the UK. I just wanted to give a stat on how the UK gambling industry is faring at the moment. And all the numbers you've seen before are all going up. It's not often you see numbers in trends go down in these kind of things. But the UK gambling industry is obviously under a bit of pressure, and this is pre the current situation. But there was a small drop predicted between 2019 and 2020. And that's even supposed to go down even further up to 2024. So obviously a lot of reasons for that. Things like regulation is one that's hit the industry quite hard and will obviously continue to hit the industry hard in the coming years. So it's a tough time for the gambling industry. Where do esports fit in the UK? We know esports is big in the world, and we obviously know countries like South Korea and China really dominate just in terms of pure numbers, partly because of population, but also because of the interest in esports in those markets. Well, in 2016, there was 6.5 million esports fans in the UK. In 2019, that's tipped to be 8 million esports fans in the UK. So that's a pretty substantial growth in a few years. And that's a lot of people. So we know that esports is big in the UK. Just one thing to note though, it does actually lag behind other major esports destinations. Around 6% of the UK are described as big esports fans. If you compare themselves to say Turkey, that's 16%, Poland 14%, 12% in Romania and Spain, and 10% in markets such as Denmark, Portugal, and Sweden. So there's definitely room to grow for esports within the UK. And just before we get into the data that we've looked at, we've just looked at how big is esports gambling within the UK. Now, actually, when we look at the Gambling Commission's figures, esports, when they look at their overall numbers, isn't actually even asked in do people bet on it regularly. It's not until we get to online gambling, where 21% of UK adults have gambled online in the past 4 weeks, do we get a real number on the popularity of esports betting. It's just 6% of the 21% who gamble online in the past 4 weeks. That's just 1% of the total UK population gambling on esports. It's obviously much more pronounced amongst younger audiences, 18 to 24-year-olds especially, and that matches well with all the industry numbers that we see for esports viewers as well. It's obviously very younger biased. The reason for setting the scene was obviously to tick a couple of boxes. You know, is esports big? Well, yes, it's definitely big. Is it big in gambling? Well, not yet, but has it got potential to grow? Yes. So that's what we wanted to look at today. What is the potential for esports to take more of that share, that 1% share it's got right now, and grow that, especially within the UK? So we spoke to 1,000 regular gamblers. This is people who gamble sports, poker, slots, or bingo, excluding the lottery. So the more kind of core gambling audience, you might say. A third of our audience actually bet on esports, and 2/3 of our audience do not bet on esports. So we're looking to compare to see what we can tell the difference between the two, to give some insight into what drives people to bet and not to bet on esports. Now, it would be amiss of us to not look at the current situation. The research we conducted was conducted just last weekend. So we have looked at what is happening at the moment within the UK. It's obviously tough times. It's tough times for a lot of industries out there at the moment. And nearly 6 in 10 gamblers have reduced their spend because of the current situation. So behavior is certainly changing. There's obviously a lack of physical shops to bet in. There's a lack of casinos or bingo halls to bet in. And then one in four, so they've actually moved their spend to other forms of gambling. So while some are reducing spend, that spend is going elsewhere. But obviously, if you add it up, it's not all going elsewhere. And then a third agree that they've actually looked for new things to bet on. And this is really interesting because a lot of gamblers have a core group of activities that they gamble on. Esports for some will be new, and maybe that's one of the things they've The current situation has obviously impacted sports bettors more than anyone, and nearly 7 in 10 sports bettors have reduced their spend due to the current situation. If you're a big sports bettor like myself, the sporting calendar looks pretty bleak right now. A lot of talk in the UK has been recently about Belarusian football being one of those big markets, and me and a few friends have definitely got together and are following a team ourselves, but it doesn't quite hit the mark in following the kind of sports that I enjoy following and gambling on a regular basis. So I'm definitely in one of these 71% who miss being able to bet on sports. Around half of our sports bettors have completely stopped betting on sports due to the current situation. And then we look at those who say sport is their favorite activity to gamble on. More of those are looking for new things to bet on and are moving their money elsewhere. So behavior is changing for all gamblers, but sports bettors especially, their behavior is changing. But there's actually some very good news for esports in terms of gambling. So for sports bettors who are looking to bet elsewhere, where have they moved their money? Well, firstly, it's gone to the lottery, then it's gone to casino, but third in the list is esports. And this is really encouraging. Esports is becoming more of an opportunity for those gamblers. It's becoming more prominent when they're looking for something to gamble on. So to help explain a bit more about what's going on at the moment, let's have a look at what those who don't currently bet on esports think about esports and how we can help them understand what esports is more. A lot of talk has actually been, as I've been looking at kind of news and blogs over the last few weeks, about it being among sports games. And that's exactly what we see here. The short-term opportunity is definitely within sports games, within esports. So 22% of our non-esports bettors are actually considering betting on esports in the next 3 months. And when we ask them, so what type of games will that be? Sports comes number one. And this is really interesting for anyone who's a big esports fan and a big esports gambler. The list here from 1 to 5 is kind of flipped on its head of what you might expect. Your big MOBAs, League of Legends, Dota 2, they're the ones that generally see the most money along with Counter-Strike. But here we're seeing a different story. And it looks like here that the entry point for those not engaged with esports at the moment will be sports. And if you take a step back, I think it does make sense. If you're not someone who's into video gaming massively, trying to find out what's going on League of Legends or Dota 2, it's going to be very difficult in a short amount of time. Whereas things like FIFA, NBA, Formula One, they're actually things that you're accustomed to seeing. And actually will have the same betting markets that you're used to betting on. You can have accumulator, you can bet on corners, you can bet on free kicks, the kind of things that you're used to. We're also seeing that things like Call of Duty, so first-person shooters will definitely appeal as well. Again, it's titles that have an easier entry into the market than others. And what is it that drives people? What is it as an operator you could talk about to customers and potentials that may make them think about esports next time they're gambling? One of the main things is that it's different and the streams are exciting. So some quite emotive messages there that you could use. And then we look at the barriers. What stops people from gambling on esports? Well, the top two, not knowing enough about the teams and players and not understanding the games. You could actually flip them to be positives. Gamblers here are telling us that they're not going to gamble because they just don't know enough and they don't understand the game. This is by far a nice communication point for you to take to customers and potentials. It's something you can talk about to them to educate them at a time like this. We also see this when we ask for their comments, just qualitatively. What is it that stops you from gambling on esports? And that lack of knowledge and understanding is the theme that comes out far beyond any other themes. And one of the interesting things is it's about being calculated and knowing what to bet on. As gamblers, we like to think that we have the edge, or that we at least know enough to make a sensible or calculated bet. And that phrase calculated was coming through and through in our analysis here. You look at that comment in the bottom left. To gamble, it's crucial that you have a good idea of the sport and what's involved. Though I enjoy video games, I don't have the knowledge and so be throwing money away. People here asking for the information to be able to make an informed bet. And for many operators right now, that information doesn't exist on the level it does for, say, horse racing, where you may explain what a Trixie is or a Yankee is. Those kind of information definitely isn't as apparent for some of those operators. When we dig a bit deeper and see what else is stopping people from betting on esports, a lack of interest is there, but it's actually secondary to knowledge. That knowledge gap is always the key factor that we see in why people are not betting on esports right now. So what can we learn from our esports gamblers? As I said, we had around a third of our sample said they currently bet on esports. And so there's some really interesting themes here. So the turquoisey bar that we can see there is our sports bettors, and our purple bar is our esports bettors. And we're just asking them, what's important to you when you're trying to find a site to gamble on? Obviously, things like being able to cash out and the best odds are the most important factors, kind of the hygiene factors that we would expect. Having a large variety, obviously important. But when we come down to the next 3 or 4, this is when we start to see some really interesting differences between esports bettors and sports bettors. So in-play betting is more important for esports bettors. Having detailed stats is 10% more important than for sports bettors. The same goes for live audio and video streams, and the same for betting tips. So there you can see things like having stats and live audio and video streams and betting tips are much more important for esports bettors, and they have to be key features on your site for you to stand out and make sure you're speaking to what esports bettors want. You also think about the lack of knowledge that esports bettors are telling us they have, non-esports bettors, sorry. And that detailed stats will help people improve their level of knowledge. The kind of stats that are there for every single sports league aren't quite there for esports at the moment. But if you can build them up over time and make them available, then this will really help non-esports bettors find their market within esports. And what is it esports bettors like about it? Well, it's excitement and uniqueness. It's different to other things they bet on. They're gamers themselves. It's the same kind of themes of why people bet on sports. You like sports, you play sports. So you bet on the sports that you like or play. The same goes for gaming. And again, it's easy to see. Games like Fortnite here, they are extremely exciting. They're quick, they're fast. And one of the things to kind of speak to is the time it takes. You know, a Dota 2 game lasts around half an hour. Same for League of Legends. A FIFA game takes about 15 to 20 minutes, as opposed to the best part of just under 2 hours for a football game. So you can pack more into a short amount of time, which also means there's more chance for people to gamble at different points along the way in play. We've spoken a little bit about current events driving a new audience, and that's very clear. We kind of labeled them the newcomers and the hardcore. But you've got your newcomers who have only started betting on esports in the last month, and they're the ones who the entry point into esports is going to be sports. They prefer to use their current betting provider because they don't quite know how to navigate the market yet. And esports at the moment will be a secondary betting factor as opposed to their other sports or casino or slots that they bet on. Our hardcore on the other side, they're the ones who prefer MOBAs, first person and third person. And they're very much more likely to use specialist betting sites rather than the more generic high street ones. They're going to specialist sites because that's where the information that they desire is right now. And they're much more likely to be gamers, which makes sense. They're more engaged in gaming as an activity. So what have we learned from our research? And how can operators enhance their offer? Well, it's clear through every single angle that we looked at, there's a clear desire for more information. 62% of those who don't currently bet on esports said, I just need more info. And as we said earlier, it's a very clear and easy communication point to talk to people about what esports is, what the different events offer, what are the pitfalls, what you need to know. There's definitely a very clear knowledge gap that operators can fill. There's also a clear need to be more sports games. And that, as we said, is definitely the entry point for those currently not betting on esports. And then they may progress from FIFA to Call of Duty to League of Legends would be a natural progression. It's worth saying that there is still a little bit of a connotation about being fixed and less regulated. But one of the things we were looking into and wanted to check was Is esports seen as geeky? Is it complicated? And the numbers there on the far right, they're low. And it tells you actually it's more about knowledge than it being complicated or too geeky. So what are our 5 key learnings that we've found from our research? Well, now is the perfect time. Sounds quite weird to be saying now's the perfect time for anything, but for esports gambling, it definitely is the perfect time. It's not to say that no esports events have been cancelled. Some have, but not on the extent that the sporting calendar has been. The short-term growth will definitely come from sports. It's the entry into esports for those currently not engaged in it. And it's the one that F1 especially, and FIFA and NBA are certainly looking at improving their visibility across esports. It's also very clear that you can't use a catch-all approach. Someone who's going to bet on Dota or League of Legends is very different to someone who's going to bet on NBA or FIFA or Call of Duty. You need to understand your audiences and target different events to those different audiences. Take the time to educate and inform. People want to know more, but you have to give them the right messages about the right things and educate and upskill their knowledge of esports. And lastly, we looked at those features that spike for esports. Leverage those, things like stats, live audio, and tips. They have to be included as part of your offering. Have blogs about upcoming events. Give people more knowledge about esports, and that's going to make you stand out against the competition. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm just going to check and come off and see if there's any questions. Yeah, I can't see any questions. I don't know if anyone has sent any in that I haven't seen and wants to retry. Sure. Just seeing a question come in about, do you think esports will keep the momentum? Yes. I mean, if you go back to kind of early 2010 is when esports really became a scene. The trajectory since then has been incredible growth. At the moment, it's given it even more exposure, and we can only see esports driving again and again. Another question about after this period when normal sport events, sorry, just the questions coming in. How many esports tournaments are there? Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know. I mean, if you just have a look on any betting operator, there's esports tournaments going on all the time. Some of the leagues have constant leagues going on, just like you would do in the Premier League. They have round robins and then tournaments. Some are more knockout, but there is always an esports tournament going on. A question about, from what we've seen, who are the current market leaders for esports betting? I mean, it is more the specialist sites at the moment. Some of the sites like Pinnacle would be one of the leaders, but you look at where the money is for things like Dota, League of Legends, and Counter-Strike. People are betting on those, are betting more on the more niche specialist esports websites who've been there since the beginning, rather than the more high street names that more people are aware of. That's all the questions that I think I've seen for now. Unless any more come through. I'd like to give it another second or so, but if not, thank you everyone so much for taking the time. I know it's a very different format to what we're expecting. I was definitely looking forward to the poker tournament that was going to be held during this conference, but not to be. But thank you all very much for your time. As everyone said before, stay safe, and wishing everyone all the best. Thank you. Take care.